Welcome to Chasing Hard, a podcast about what it looks like and trusting God when life doesn't turn out the way you plan. Like there are so many examples. I have so many examples. People that I've talked with recently that are dealing with tremendous life situations that didn't turn out the way they planned. One such incident is a woman who lost her husband of 20 something plus years, maybe longer. I know she mentioned that they'd been together for 45 years, but she wasn't that old. So I don't think they've been married for that long, but her husband died and pretty immediately, pretty quickly of a heart attack. He left for work and he didn't come home. And I just remember at one point during the funeral process, she said, I don't want to be here. I almost didn't come. I just want my husband back. I mean, that's not something she saw coming. That's not something she planned on. That is a what do you do when life doesn't turn out the way you planned situation. And by the way, if just in case you haven't noticed, it's just me today. But I have some things like that I have been wrestling with, struggling with, and I just wanted to talk with you about it. Another friend who, while her life has been totally turned upside down, everything from no longer being married to leaving her church to leaving her town, her home, her job, all the things that were familiar and brought comfort to her, gone at once. Like, it's hard to lose one thing. It's hard to deal with a separation or a divorce under the best of circumstances. It's hard to deal with a break in a relationship under normal circumstances. It's hard to leave a job that you love. It's hard to leave the house that you love, that's been your home for years, where you brought your children home from the hospital to. It's hard to move from a different city to another state even. And she said, I just want my life back. And I was reminded of a time in my life when I felt the same way. It was just an extremely difficult time in the lives of me and my family. We moved from our home where we raised our kids, where I homeschooled our kids, where they grew up and did all the things. We had a little bit of land, and so they could play frisbee, ultimate frisbee. We had bonfires. They could run and play, and we had to move to an apartment. That's a story all its own. But I remember many times during that first year of thinking, I just want to go home, and also thinking I want my life back. And there have been many times during my life when I wanted my life back. And so then I'm reminded of motherhood and the all the challenges of motherhood. They're hard, from bringing a newborn home with the lack of sleep and the lack of order in your home. Everything just is kind of upside down, and it's hard. Like, it's hard. I know I see a lot of posts from new moms who they're marking the first time this, the first time that, the 1 month, 10 month, whatever. And they always say, time, slow down. I'm glad they're saying that, because I don't know that we all get how quickly time passes. But to me, looking back on raising kids is a blur. I remember being in the throes and being tired in the various stages, when you have teenagers, but they're not yet driving, but they're involved in all of these activities, and you're taking them to all of these places. And a part of me really loved doing that. I loved being the parent who transported all the kids. I loved being the parent who took the kids to different places. I wouldn't trade that for the world, but also trying to manage these schedules and these lives of 3 teenagers and a preteen, or 2 teenagers and a preteen, or whatever ages they were. It was difficult. And I remember longing for the time when my children could drive, but dreading it all the same. And the thing is, motherhood brings with it a lot of joy. Wouldn't trade it for the world, but it also brings with it a lot of sorrow and a lot of loss and a lot of change. And you're called upon to be willing to roll with those changes, because whether you're willing to roll with them or not, they're going to happen. So why not make the best of it and go with the flow? And again, it's not an easy thing to do. I have talked with a mother who recently has a long distance relationship with one of her children and doesn't see her often, but tries to have some sort of relationship, the best relationship she can have while her child is living several states away. And I can relate, obviously, because you've heard me say my youngest lives 2,300 miles from me. But it gets more difficult, I think, the longer they're gone, because their whole lives are there, and you're not super familiar with their lives, and they have forgotten about the lives that they lived back here. And so she was going through a really difficult period when her daughter was involved in a lot of different things at her church. She was in a new relationship that looked pretty serious. And the mother was excited for her daughter that she moved to this place and has created a life for herself. But at the same time, she has to grieve that loss, and she has to figure out what it looks like going forward. And it doesn't just depend on her, because all relationships involve more than just us. And what the mother may want the relationship to look like, perhaps the daughter doesn't. And that's hard. It's hard. A lot of it is hard. So what do you do? I mean, I'm just naming a few life situations. What do you do when you've experienced those times when things don't turn out the way you plan? I was also listening to this other mother last week, and she was going through a health threat with one of her loved ones, and her words were, "I've never really been faced with anything hard. I feel like we live in a bubble. We've not had to go through hard things." And I guess you would have to define hard, because hard can look different for all of us, obviously. So how do you define the hard things? And yeah, what does that look like for her? Like, it's hard for me to comprehend that you've not experienced difficulties in your life. But who am I to argue with her about her life? And she said that, quite unusual to her normal reaction, she didn't pull out Google to let Dr. Google tell her all the things, and she didn't worry. And she wasn't even conscious of turning it over to God, but feels like, yeah, that's what she did. So good for her. that she was able to do that. And hopefully she'll do that going forward, because that's probably, if that was the first encounter that she ever had with difficult situations, it's probably not going to be the last, because we live in a world where we are faced with difficult situations. Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. And so that he told us, he warned us, we know we're going to be faced with difficult times, difficult situations. And so his promise that he has overcome it all, and that no matter what we have to deal with here, it's just temporary. And that's the thing that I try to hold on to the most, I guess, in my life. This is not my forever home. We will not be here forever and ever. There is a shelf life. We have a limit on how long we're going to live. It's just fact. So turning my focus to what the end looks like, keeping the end in mind. And the end isn't here even. The end is eternity, where you go to spend eternity. That's how I deal with tribulations and trials. This is temporary. This life is temporary. This situation is temporary. It's going to change. Things change. Things always change. So what will be my posture? And how will I go forward? How will I move forward? So I hope you were able to do that too, like to get outside of the moment, knowing that this situation will change because life changes, and this isn't all there is. I know it's very difficult times in which we live, all the just the crazy stuff that you hear every day with new strains of viruses and new war threats and all the political stuff and the divisive stuff. I think we're not as divided as what is portrayed on media, but that's not a trail I'm going down on this particular podcast. And maybe I will soon. But anyway, just some thoughts that I had about the hard stuff in life. And where do you put your trust? Where do you put your trust when life doesn't turn out the way you planned? Because there's a good chance that life, at some point or another, won't turn out the way you plan. Whether it's job related, family related, relationship, money, health, all the important things. There will probably be a time when life doesn't turn out the way you plan. And maybe you're way ahead of me in the game, and it's one thing after another that hasn't turned out anything like you planned. I'm sorry. And then I hope that you choose to look at the unseen things, the eternal things, the end, and find your trust and put your hope in Jesus, who is the giver of life. Just some thoughts. Thanks for joining me on Chasing Hard. And I'm looking forward to some new guests that I'm lining up. And yeah, I hope you come along for the ride. See you next week.